right, everybody, we are so glad to see you, and we're so glad to be back with the history series. And I want you to spread the word that it's going to continue. And we have a lot of speakers who are lined up in the future, and I know you'll enjoy coming and learning about old Myrtle Beach. I'm Diane Devon Stokes. Most of you know that and don't care, and it's okay. And it's okay. It's okay. And you know, I don't always say that, and then somebody comes out of the audience later and says, by the way, who were you and what were you doing there? So anyway, I'm here to hold Bob's hand. And it's okay. His wife Karen said I could do that if he needed it, because he said he was really nervous about this. But he's got a great story to tell. But what's funny is Bob doesn't want to talk about himself. He wants to talk about Myrtle Beach. And so I accumulated some information about Bob so y'all will know him better. And that's good, because maybe some of you don't know. How many here don't really know Bob Gray? See? Look at that, Bob. These are your new friends. And so they need to know about you. And I said that to him. I said, no, you have to give me some information about yourself so that people who come and don't know about Bob, who's lived here all of his life except the first 2 days of his birth. He was born in 1946 at the Conway Hospital, and it was 2 days later he came to Myrtle Beach, of course, because we didn't have a hospital at that time. His parents were Philip and Esther Nance Gray, and most of you know we have the Nance Plaza. That is his grandparents. People sometimes mistake that, but that is named after his grandparents. We think his grandmother would be rolling over in her grave if she knew she was in a beer garden. Don't tell her. Don't anybody tell her. Okay, Bob's better half is right here in front of me. This is Karen. Welcome, Karen. We're glad you're here and gave me permission to hold his hand. They have 7 children between them, 4 boys and 3 girls. They have 12 grandchildren and 8 great grandchildren. Congratulations, guys. Bob grew up on 4th Avenue North, across the street from the First Baptist Church, and in 1958 the family moved to a new home on Hampton Circle, which is now like 54th Avenue North. Of course, he went to school here, the Baptist College then. He went to, which is now, Charleston Southern University. He got a BS in mathematics and a minor in history. And that's why you're going to be really good today, Bob. Absolutely. Degree in mathematics. Now listen to this, because this really is a great part of the history of Bob. His first job at age 8 was selling newspapers. Papers were only 5 cents, and he got to keep 2 cents. And like he said, 100 papers a day earned $1. And then, for an 8-year-old boy, that was pretty good money, though, Bob. He worked summers until 1961 at his father's business, Gray Welding and Machine Company, sweeping floors, emptying trash, and other odd jobs until 1961. And then he worked 3 summers from 61, 62, 63 at the Myrtle Beach State Park Campground. Let's see, he made $55 a week back then. And then in 1964 and 65, he worked at Genco Janitorial Supply Company as a delivery driver and a sales clerk. And in 66, he was a lifeguard at the Myrtle Beach Pavilion. I hope you're going to tell us some of those stories today. He still doesn't want to talk about himself, though. But he had the center stand at the flagpole, which was the most prestigious place for a lifeguard to be. I guess you got to see the girls first there. You had your first choice as they walked by. And then while he was away at college, he worked at the Charleston County Juvenile Detention Center as a jailer. After graduation from college, he worked at Graco Hardware, then Graco Steel Corporation, and after graduation from there, he went on to work for his father at Sunco Pool Supply in 1982 and purchased Sunco in 1989. But he sold it in 2020, and guess what? He's now retired. What? But what's so interesting about Bob that I've noticed over the past 40 years that I've known Bob is his community involvement. And my goodness, we could spend another hour talking about his community involvement. He has done so many outstanding things. But one of the things, of course, Like most people, he was involved in Rotary and different organizations, but one thing that really always impressed me is he was always there when I was emceeing the parades, because he was the president and past president of the Myrtle Beach Shrine Club, director of the Omar Chefs Shrine Unit, past potentate, that's president of the Omar Shriners, Coastal South Carolina. He was past president of the South Atlantic Shrine Association of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And he has, of course, served on the Chamber of Commerce committees. And believe it or not, he and Karen have been Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus for like over 30 years at the Christmas tree lighting. He's done so many wonderful things. They are currently both members of the Garden City Baptist Church. We are so glad to have Bob Gray here, who didn't want to talk about himself, but I had to give you a little history, right? This, my friends, is Bob Gray. Let's hear it for Bob.
Thank you, Diane. That was I don't know if I could live up to all those accolades, but I appreciate them. Thank you very much. Thank you. I see some friends out there. Hey, Jim, Robert, and my nephew, Wayne. Where did he go? Back there in the back. And, of course, others, my kinfolk from North Myrtle Beach, Mr. Edge. He's a distant kin. As I said, Wayne told you last year, the family goes back to Horry County to the 1700s. And along the way, at one time, just about everybody in the county was kin to one another. And that's how Mr. Edge and I got there. Anyhow, that was. And if you want to hear about my pedigree as far as the family tree, go listen to what my nephew Wayne, his talk last year. He did a very excellent, from all the way back in the 1700s forward to the present day of the Todds and the Nances in Horry County. So we go back a long way, but I wanted to talk about Myrtle Beach, and so I didn't thank you for giving me all those accolades, but really Myrtle Beach is what brought us here. But when the talks I've heard about Myrtle Beach, primarily they focused in on what's happened from Conway, and nothing negative to say about the great people from Conway that came this way. But there were people here before they got here. This was not the western frontier. There were people here. The area we're talking about that I'd like to talk a little bit about is the Sand Ridge area. The Sand Ridge is, you ever heard of Highway 15? Well, that was Highway 501 at one time. Before the present day, before the runway air base was there in 1955, the Myrtle Beach Bombing and Gunnery Range that was there before then didn't have the same footprint. And when they rebuilt the base in the early 50s, they cut the road to Sockasty, which was what we call Highway 15 today. That road ran out to Sockasty, and that was the way you came to Myrtle Beach. Highway 17 did not exist. Highway 17 there was a King's Highway, but it was a one-lane dirt track through the woods, just a sandy rut road that was not very. Most people rode on the beach because it was easier to ride the Strand at low tide than it was to come inland and try to ride the roads. But anyway, the road to Myrtle Beach came through Sockasty. Actually, Highway 17, when it was initially established, it left Mount Pleasant and went to Marion, South Carolina, up along the roadbed of what today is called Highway 41. That was Highway 17, went on up, it's called the Ocean Highway. And then in the early 30s, they moved it over. And as the WPA and the CCC cut the tracks from Myrtle Beach to Georgetown, the track was kind of cut from Georgetown to Murrells Inlet. But from Murrells Inlet, the track left and went to Conway, along what is now the 701. There was no 544. And 501 picked up from Myrtle Beach and went out to Socastee and then went to Conway. And in 1948, I'm going to speak about the Intracoastal Waterway in a moment. In 1948, the road was open that you know today as 501. That wasn't there until 1948, after World War II. Before then, if you wanted to go to Conway, you went to Socastee along what's now Highway 15. And that was the road into Myrtle Beach. That was how you got here. And as I said, the city of Myrtle Beach had really kind of left that out there as a kind of a redhead stepchild of mine, because they have not really tried to improve that very much. It's still a two-lane road out to, gets cut by the runways that were redirected when the airport was built in 1954. It picks up on the other side, if you're curious, and on the other side of the runway it's called Emory Road. And they're just developing Emory Road, and Emory Road proceeds on out to what's called Socastee Boulevard, and from what we call the back gate area or Bellamy Interchange, it goes on out to Socastee and across the bridge there. That bridge was put there in 1936, and the road was improved from Socastee to Myrtle Beach in 1910. There was another bridge there, a wooden bridge across Socastee Swamp that went behind the Methodist church there at Socastee, if you're curious, and then across Socastee Swamp along what's now 544 to Conway. The area, as I said, the reason why Highway 501 did not exist as we know it today was because of a geological problem. That area where Carolina Forest is was a kind of a flat, swampy area, and the only old maps that's just addressed as impassable swamp. You couldn't go that way. But the Intracoastal Waterway, the government did us a great job in a way. They built the Intracoastal Waterway for defense of the country. In World War I, it was proven that we needed a way to move munitions up and down the eastern seaboard, because the German U-boats were sinking our ships out in the ocean. So the government thought about it, and they said, okay, we'll build an Intracoastal Waterway where we can move freight up and down the East Coast without having to go out into the ocean and exposing them to submarine warfare. So you wonder why the Intracoastal Waterway was built. Well, that was the reason why. It had some disadvantages and some advantages. So let me step back a little bit. I like this. I'm kind of skipping around because I didn't write my notes down. But I want to step back a little bit further and say that Myrtle Beach, all of Overy County, really needs to be part of North Carolina, not South Carolina. The Lord's proprietors and the English government, back when there was only one Carolina, and they said, well, okay, we need to make it easier to govern, so they decided to make it two Carolinas, and that's how we got a North Carolina and a South Carolina. It was easier to govern two of the areas rather than one. And the Carolinas at one time went all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. But Georgia tried to give the state of Georgia back to South Carolina a few years ago, because Georgia actually was part of South Carolina. They were having some problems down there, and they said, why don't we just give this back to South Carolina and let them solve our problems? I didn't run it, but anyway, Overy County should have been part of North Carolina geographically, I guess is the right word for it, because we're so cut off. You ever heard the word the Independent Republic of Overy? You wonder why? Well, the reasoning why was because we were so independent down here. We were cut off. the rivers come out of North Carolina, the Waccamaw, the Little PD, the Lumber PD, the Lynches, they all come out of North Carolina and flow either into Winyah Bay or into Charleston Harbor or Jamestown. And it was very difficult before the roads were built, and it was very difficult to go inland. There were no railroads, no telegraph. So it was very difficult to get any information inland, much less people, because of the rivers and the swamps. And we had the steamboats up and down the Waccamaw, up and down the PD, up and down the Little PD. But they went to Georgetown. They didn't go inland. They went to Georgetown. So we really should have been part of North Carolina geographically. You can walk across the North Carolina-South Carolina line, but you can't go from Horry County without crossing water. And for our little strip along the coast, it even made it worse when the government built the Intracoastal Waterway, because it was only 4 bridges at one time. We're an island. There were only 4 bridges at one time that let you get off the island. There was one at Cherry Grove, one here at Myrtle Beach, one at Sockasty, and one at Georgetown. And you either went to one of those 4 bridges, you stupid to rob a bank here because you couldn't get away. It was only 4 bridges, and you had to cross one of those 4 bridges to get off the property. That was brought home to me, and when Hurricane Hugo hit, my business at that time was just on the other side of the waterway. I was stupid enough to say during Hurricane Hugo, so my son and I rode out there to the business, and we got to the top of the Pine Island Bridge, which is a high bridge today. Looking down the other side, there was traffic backed up as far as you could see trying to get into Myrtle Beach. This was the morning after Hurricane Hugo. I went to the bottom of the bridge, and there was a highway patrolman station down there, and I pulled up, and I said, if I go out to my business, can I come back and go? The governor has ordered an evacuation of the island, and you're not supposed to be there. So I had to walk back across the bridge, and I'm told that 15 minutes after I walked across the bridge that they stationed a armored personnel carrier on top of the bridge and stopped people from even walking across the bridge. A classmate of mine in Carolyn's, Wayne Vereen, had a home there, so he took his boat and started ferrying people back and forth across the waterway. But anyway, it's a different subject. But we should have been part of North Carolina, not South Carolina. And this area over here was even more isolated because of the swamps. Like I said, you just couldn't get here. You could come up from Sockasty on that Sockasty Road, and you could come in from Wampee. You ever heard of Wampee? Wampee is west of North Myrtle Beach. Mr. Edges tell you about. He's my cousin from up there in North Myrtle Beach. He can tell you where Wampee was. Myrtle Beach has a road called the Little River Road. And the reason it's called the Little River Road, because that was the main road north. If you wanted to go north out of Myrtle Beach, you took the Little River Road, took you across where about the Grand Dunes is today, to the other side of the waterway, up through the little area called Vault. There was a little home, on the other side of the waterway across from Restaurant Road, there was a little community called Vault. And then that connected into Highway 90, and then went up through Wampee and on up into North Carolina. My grandfather, Dan Nance, I guess I need to talk about them in a little bit, but anyway, he was from Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where he came. Anyway, we should have been part of North Carolina and not South Carolina. And that fact that it took so much effort, especially in the spring of the years when you had the what they call freshets, which are rains. Our monsoon season is the spring of the year. and the rivers would flood. And when the rivers flooded, even the landings or the ferries had difficulty getting from one side of the river to the other. So if you wanted to go to Columbia from here with no railroad, you had to go to Socastee, cross Socastee Swamp. You could either catch the riverboat there or going up to Conway, cross at Peachtree Ferry, going up to Conway to one of the ferries there to cross the Waccamaw River. Then you could go over to Gallivant's Ferry or down to Britain's Neck, cross the ferries there and go inland. And then you'd come to you cross the Little Petey River, and then after a while you get to the Big Petey River. You got to cross that, and if you go towards Columbia, you're going to run into the Lynch's River. You got to cross that, and then you got to come to the Catawba River, and you got to cross that. And so you just had a series of rivers. Now, if you were in Charleston, you didn't have that problem. You could go inland and not have to cross a river. But that's why Myrtle Beach or Horry County was kind of so. One reason it was so unpopulated. Anyway, it was very rural, but it was not empty. There were people here, and it was a very agrarian society. And people say, well, what was the product? What did they produce? Well, you ever heard of sailing ships? Horry County was the source of the pine tar, the naval stores, what they call naval stores. Where they got that was from the pine trees. And these longleaf pines here are great sources of turpentine. And so there is not a tree or not a field in Horry County that hasn't been logged over. I'll tell you that right now. There are no trees that are several hundred years old. They've all been cut down. Every one of them. The naval stores business, the turpentine business was first. And the people actually, they scarfed, if you will, the pine trees to get the tar and resin out of them. And they boil that down to separate the tar, which was used to waterproof the wooden ships. And then the turpentine was used in medicines, paints, other products. So the naval stores business was integral to Horry County early on. Before then, it was indigo. We never had the rice that was opportunity for Georgetown County. That was another crop. We had some rice fields here, but not many. But mainly it was turpentine, naval stores. And then when that business started to wind down, when the wooden ships started to disappear, and the iron ships started taking over the oceans, well, they went back to those same pine trees and started logging them. And these pine trees are massive. I've read reports where ones we see today, you see one today that's got a 3-foot trunk. We think it's big. But I've read with some of them were 16 feet around. Massive pine trees. That's how Myrtle Beach really got its initial thrust was lumber. They'd already done the turpentine, and I'll give the Conway crowd, they put the railroad in. The Chadbourn Conway and Chadbourn Railroad came out of Chadbourn, North Carolina in 1898 from Chadbourn to Conway. And it was a multi-purpose railroad for moving product and people and produce and such. But then they decided, well, let's put one over here to catch the lumber, the timber, on this side of the Waccamaw River. Remember the Intracoastal Waterway wasn't there, So you had the timber. You had all these big pine trees, cypress trees. So they put the railroad into what's called Pine Island, which is on the other side of the waterway, about a mile or two past the waterway. And why did they stop at Pine Island? Anybody got a clue?
Water.
Water. You got it. These were water locomotives. These were steam locomotives. Thank you, Robert. They had to have a source of water. And guess what's at Pine Island? Sockasty Creek. So that was where they got the water from. The end of the railroad stopped at Pine Island because that was where they had a source of water. The other end, the back end, was at the Waccamaw River. And they sat there for a while, and they had a sawmill there. They put a sawmill there at Pine Island. And then they had the bright idea, well, let's go get the rest of the timber. Let's put a railroad all the way to what is Myrtle Beach. So they brought the railroad in. The charter for that railroad said that the railroad ought to go, or had the opportunity to go, to Withers Wash. I'll get to talking about Withers Wash in a few minutes, but they didn't. The people that owned the railroad did not own the property at Withers Wash. They owned the property in downtown, what's now downtown Myrtle Beach. So guess where they went? They went to downtown Myrtle Beach. And the railroad initially went all the way down 9th Avenue to the ocean. And they even experimented with rafting timber off the beach. Didn't work that well because the ocean is a little bit rougher than the river, but they tried. At least they tried. So the tracks ran all the way down to the beach. And my uncle, Casper Benton, in an interview that he did with the Sun newspaper some years ago, I read in that article that my great-great-grandfather, Marshall Nance, had the first fast food restaurant in Myrtle Beach. He sold, he was a fisherman by trade. He sold fish sandwiches at the end of the railroad track for a nickel in 1910. So he had the first fast food restaurant in Myrtle Beach selling fish sandwiches at the end of the railroad track in 1910. Where I don't want to go from there. Anyway, one of the reasons they brought it to downtown Myrtle Beach was, again, water. Guess what downtown Myrtle Beach had? Artesian well. Thank you, Robert.
Wow.
They had an artesian well right downtown in Myrtle Beach at the corner of 9th Avenue and Oak Street. And another one, later on, they found an artesian well. They built a hotel in 1900 called the Seaside Inn. It was the first hotel in Myrtle Beach. They had been boarding houses. As a matter of fact, my great-grandmother ran a boarding house here in Myrtle Beach. But the first hotel that was built here was the Seaside Hotel. So I don't think y'all got a picture of the Seaside. But it was a three-story hotel between 8th and 9th Avenue on the east side of what's now Highway 17. And there was an artesian flow there that provided quality fresh water. Quality fresh water was hard to find. I mean, you could find all the swamp water you wanted between here and Conway, but it was not something you'd want to drink. But these artesian wells were good water, spring water. Unfortunately, it seems like the Intracoastal Waterway disturbed the water flow. And the artesian wells that once existed here, I know of one at down on Folly Swamp Road in Sockasty, and another one there at on the Sand Ridge, and another one down at what's just south of Withers Wash. They all seem to have died or dried up, and I assumed, lack of any further information, that's part of the Intracoastal Waterway. but we have other water sources today. After the artesian wells, they started drilling wells. And for many, many, many years, the city of Myrtle Beach water was deep well water until 1987. And it was deep well water. Matter of fact, there's still some of the wells around town, and I think the city keeps them operatable, is that the right word? In case our other water source has problems, they can go back to these wells if they have to. The reason why they had to abandon the wells is what? A good old FDA. These wells of deep well water was drawn off of an aquifer that had a lot of fluoride in it. And fluoride is a natural occurring dissolved material into water. You can't filter it out. It's actually part of the water, like salt is in the water. You can't filter salt out. You can distill the water and get rid of it, but still the fluoride was there. It was a better source. Guess what? The Intracoastal Waterway. So they started, the city started taking water out of the Intracoastal Waterway and treating that. And that's what we have today is our water source is the Intracoastal Waterway back up with water from the Little Petey River at Bull Creek. That's another Grand Stream Water and Sewer does a great job of supplying us with quality water. I'll give them a check for that. They do a great job, but we still have the deep wells. And then before that, we had the artesian wells. And where am I? Back, the trouble we get in the Myrtle Beach was the Little River Road, which today is called Little River Road between 38th Avenue North and Pine Road. It used to go down what's now Oak Street. And that was the way my mother, when she talks of going to see her grandfather and kinfolk up in Shallow, they would take the wagon and leave Myrtle Beach on a covered wagon in the early 1920s, and go up to Wampee, and then go up only up to North Carolina, take them all day, through the sand ruts up into North Carolina. And then in the 1930s, the federal government came up with the WPA and the CCC. And we benefited from that in two ways. Myrtle Beach Farms, should talk about that in a little while, but Myrtle Beach Farms was very generous in giving the state of South Carolina the first state park. Myrtle Beach State Park was donated to the state, and I understand there's a codicil that if it's ever used for anything but a state park, it reverts back to Myrtle Beach Farms. So the state of South Carolina owns a little less than a mile of pristine property of Myrtle Beach State Park. It had its own well. The CCC built that. And the construction of some of the buildings down there, if you go down there and look at picnic shelter number 1, I love to go and look at that construction. It was timbered out of the property, all of the timbers there at Myrtle Beach State Park, rough cut, 12 by 12s, 10 by 10s, all mortised and pistoned together. Just a massive shelter, all done by CCC and WPA people. And is Colonel Stiers here? No, he's not here today. Well, the park lapped over what's now Highway 17. Remember, Highway 17 was just being built, just being cut through. And the property lapped over Highway 17 in that area where you have the disc golf course out on Market Common. That was part of the state park. And the well for the state park was back, it had a water tower back there. When I was working at the state park, I and the park superintendent used to go over there and service the water tower and the pump at the base of the water tower. It's not there any longer, but it was there on the other side of the disc golf course. And the barracks that the CCC and the WPA guys had used were there where what they call Splinter City. Those buildings were not part of the World War II. They were part of the World War II Army bombing and gunnery range, but they were there before. And those buildings, in the latter part of the war, guess what they did with those buildings? That was the German prisoner of war camp. They put German prisoners of war in there. So it's been an interesting history. But anyway, I wanted to get to Colonel Stiers. He's done a wonderful job with Market Common and the former Air Force Base developing that. But I think there's 26 acres there, more or less, that was actually part of the state park. That they kind of confiscated to make it part of the World War II bombing and gunnery range, and it just never got back to the city state to be part of the state park. And us older people can remember that when not only was Splinter City over there, but the Air Force ran a campground over there in that area. But anyway, I started to say that the 17 that you know, and we know today as Highway 17, was formerly cut through by the WPA and the CCC in the early 1930s. And it came up into Myrtle Beach. And when it hit town on Main Street, it kinks to the right. And then at the Methodist Church, it kinks back to the left. Why does it do that? Robert? You're going around a railroad station. The wooden railroad station that was built in 1928 sat in the middle of 9th Avenue, there beside where the Methodist Church is today, by Nance Park, the Nance Plaza. So when they ran you had a Seaside End and Colonel Springs' office on the right side. Then you had the railroad track, the railroad station right in front of you, and you had to go around them. So that's what you're doing. You're going north on Highway 17, you kink back to the right, and then you go straight again. Well, guess what? You just went around the railroad station. And then in 1938, Burris and Chapin, Myrtle Beach Farms, decided they wanted that property where the old railroad station was. So they took up the track that went down 9th Avenue and they built a brick station. The station we have today was built in 1938, and the city has done a wonderful job, and Wayne was part of that, and our councilman over here was very integral in keeping that station to what it is today. Maybe some of y'all don't know that we have a railroad station, but it's there. It's used by the city. It's owned by the city. But the tracks originally ran down 9th Avenue to the ocean, and there was a turntable at 9th Avenue and Chester Street. And I've read where that turntable might still be there, just buried. And maybe one of these days we'll dig it up, see what it looks like. But anyway, it's 9th Avenue and Chester Street. That was Burris and Chapin that put that railroad in to serve their own purposes. But they were not alone. You had Conway Lumber Company, Camp Number 1. That there, where the bridge is at Pine Island today, there was a station. They put a crossroads there called Folly Station, and they spurred a railroad off, what's called a tram railroad, and ran it out to where the airport was, or is today. And they timbered all that property out there and cut all the trees down. And back then and today, you notice today when they go to develop a piece of ground, they don't go in there and weed out the trees. They clear cut. I mean, they take it down to bare ground. I wish they wouldn't do that because they're wiping out a lot of possible archaeological sites, but they clear cut it. Going in there with a bulldozer and clear cut nothing but dirt. I wish they'd leave a few trees, but they weren't alone. They Burris before then, the lumber companies did the same thing. So that area out there where the airport is today was already cut over, and in the city, the original city airport was out here at 10th Avenue, part of Myrtle Beach Farms, and they had a grass field out there. But in 1938, so the city bought, what was it, 150 acres? I think it's 150 acres of property. Sir? 135. 135. Thank you, Mark. Of property for a municipal airport, just south of what's now Myrtle Beach, south of the incorporated Myrtle Beach. And when the clouds started appearing like we were going to go to war, the city offered it to the federal government. The city needed business, needed progress, so they offered it to the federal government, and the government took it and utilized it. And they not only took that property, but they expanded it. This was a gunnery range. It was a bombing and gunnery range in World War II. They were training B-25 pilots. So they took all the state park, the land south of the state park, where Pirate Land Campground and Ocean, Lakewood, thank you, Lakewood Campground. Those, they bought some of that and they leased the other parts of it, and then they went across on the other side of the waterway and took the bombing range, which is where Carolina Forest developed. That was all the bombing range. But Robert Shelley, who's sitting here, his kinfolk had farms out there. And they ran them out of there. Until after the war, the federal government turned it all back over to Myrtle Beach. City of Myrtle gave it back in 1947. The city utilized it until the Korean War, and then they said, well, let's give it back to the government. So they offered it back. The government took it back, but didn't take it all. They took some of it. So that's why today the city owns, I understand, all of Pirate Land Campground, and some of Lakewood Campground is all owned by the city and leased to those people that operate it. The area on the other side of the waterway, some of it was returned to the leaseholders, like the Shelley family or Tompkins family. Other parts of it were sold off, had been bought or condemned by eminent domain, and were sold off. A lot of it to Kraft Paper International Paper Company, who needed that slash pine over there for operating a paper mill in Georgetown. But there was, I'll tell you about Conway Lumber Company, Camp Number 1, but they also ran tram rail tracks all the way up to the Dunes Club. Now these were temporary tracks, not necessarily iron rails. Matter of fact, the first locomotive that ran in to Myrtle Beach was called a Black Maria. And it was a second-hand locomotive bought up in Columbus County, North Carolina. And it was bought as a logging locomotive. And it could run on either lumber tracks or iron tracks. And its source of fuel was lumber, pine lumber. So you didn't have to haul coal in, you had a forest to cut it out of. So your lumber was here. You just had to have water and people. You brought it into Myrtle Beach. But then when they brought the lumber and they started cutting the lumber out, what else did they have to do? Well, they stumped the area out here where Broadway at the beach is. The waterway had started to drain that, and that was headquarters of what's Wither Swash, but the waterway had drained it. So now they can start farming that. And so Myrtle Beach, the Burris family, or the Burris group out of Conway, formed Myrtle Beach Farms Company. And out there at what's now Broadway at the beach was just a farming area. They grew truck farm products primarily. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, kale, peas, corn. All those products were grown out here where Broadway at the beach is today. And they trucked them out of Myrtle Beach. Those were called truck products, but they sent them out on the railroad tracks. Not only that, but they caught fish, F-I-S-H, fish. They caught a lot of fish here at one time. My great-grandfather came to Myrtle Beach. I brought his son, my grandfather, to Myrtle Beach as a fisherman. They came out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and you could come down to the coast here. You could put a dory in and row out to the rocks, just almost to the horizon are the rocks. And you can go out there and catch fish 12 months out of the year. Bring them to the beach, salt them up or ice them down, and ship them inland. And also in the fall of the year, you could seine fish. And they did a lot of seining of fish. My grandfather, Todd, had a fishery just south of what's today Wither Swash. And I said, why did they come into Myrtle Beach and not further south? Well, that's because the Todd family owned the property at Wither Swash. I'm just bouncing all around. I hope y'all are not losing. Okay. All right. There's a unique property of the coast here that's called swashes. You Yankees know what a swash is? Well, when the water drains off the land into a creek, when it goes out into the ocean at the transition at the beach, you have a transition zone where the ocean is interacting with the fresh water coming in off the land. And that's called a swash. The water swashes back and forth. That's literally the reason why they're called swashes. And Myrtle Beach is blessed with four of them. You have Midway Swash, which is down where Damien's Grill is. That drainage that's there is called Midway Swash. And then at 3rd Avenue South, between 3rd and 4th Avenue South, that's Wither Swash, which many years ago it was called 8 Mile Swash. And then you go north to 50th Avenue and you have Deep Head Swash. And then you go to 62nd Avenue, 68, and that's Cane Patch Swash. And then you go to the Dunes Club, it's called Singleton Swash. And these swashes were integral to the earlier settlers who came to Myrtle Beach. In the 30s, during the Depression, let me just say that Wither Swash, these all have been, the Clean Air and Water Act didn't exist. And these swashes have just been decremated. They're no longer the estuaries they once were. They've just been, Carolyn and I, Jim Lamb could remember the old swashes and how much fun we had in those old swashes, especially Withers Swash. Before the waterway was dug, Withers drained the water all the way back on the other side of the waterway, all drained through Withers Swash. Today it's just a muddy little trench. But before 1965, when Mr. Parker put the roller coaster down there, it was a mud marsh like you have at Burroughs Inlet, like you have at Windy Hill. It was a mud marsh. And we used to go fishing and swimming and crabbing and clamming and playing. It was just a fun place to be. That's where I learned how to swim, was in Withers Swash. I think most of the Myrtle Beach people at that time did learn to swim in Withers Swash. And, anyway, it was just a fun place to be. And then Mr. Parker came in. I don't blame him in a way, but he came here at 3rd Avenue South, and there were some high sand bluffs overlooking the Swash, and he just bulldozed them right on down into the Swash and put the roller coaster, Swamp Fox roller coaster, sits on those old marshes. And on the south side of the waterway, or south side of this marsh, Mr. Spivey from Conway started doing the same thing. And then I can remember when there's a little lake, what they call a lake, on the west side of the highway there. And that wasn't there. That was a marsh. And someone, I think probably Mr. Spivey, put a dredge in there and dredged the land. When you're on Highway 17, when you hit 3rd Avenue South, that's all fill dirt to down across the Swash. And they pumped that fill out of the Swash on both sides and put that causeway across the Swash. And they dug that lake, if you will, on the west side of the, but anyway, where was I going with all that Swash bit? Back in the 30s especially, I've been told that if it wasn't for Withers Swash, a lot of the people around Myrtle Beach would have starved to death, because it was just such a cornucopia of free food. If you weren't lazy, you could go down there and crab or fish or go hunting, go marsh hen hunting. I had my high school friends used to go marsh hen hunting down there in the marshes. Anyway, just taking advantage of that. Today, it's nothing more than a drainage ditch. I wouldn't put my big toe in that water. But I learned to swim in that Withers Swash. Anyhow, I'll get off that subject. Anyway, the same thing happened to Midway Swash, which is down crossing where the runway crosses down by Damon's. And the same thing happened at Deep Head Swash, which is where the Beach Colony Resort is. Mark, you live right there. And then where the Beach House Hotel is, the one they just condemned, and they can't get it going again. That's built on cane patch Swash. And they filled in the Swash to put that hotel there. So guess why the hotel is no longer structurally viable? It's sitting on fill from filling in the Swash. And they deserve what they got. Now, that didn't happen to Singleton Swash up by the Dunes Club, but even that one is not what it used to be. But anyway, the Swashes, back during the war, Northern Aggression, those Swashes were valuable to the Confederacy in that the Confederacy didn't have a source of salt. All your salt was either imported from Europe or it came out of the Great Lakes areas. So where could you get salt? Well, the ocean was sitting here, but you had to have a salt works to do that. So there was a salt works at Cane Patch, or Singleton Swash, and another one at Witherswash. And in early 1864, close to the end of the war, the USS Ethan Allen, a blockading ship that had been off Georgetown Harbor, was sent north to destroy these salt works. So you had a marine assault. And my good friend Ted Gregg, who writes books about the War of Northern Aggression, says that one of the first marine assaults ever conducted was done right here in Myrtle Beach, when those Marines off the USS Ethan Allen came ashore to destroy the salt works at Singleton Swash one afternoon, and then the next morning they destroyed the salt works at Witherswash. The ones at Singleton Swash were much more extensive, and you can read the ship's log. It's online, and I have read it from the USS Ethan Allen, the captain's report of what they found at these salt marshes, and they were pretty extensive. The one there at Singleton Swash, I think it had 14 or 16 salt pans, and it had a warehouse of 2,000 bushels of salt that they destroyed, plus the other buildings. And then they did the same thing at Witherswash. So there was somebody here before Conway found us. Anyway, I guess I should say that my grandparents, great-grandparents, Erasmus Todd came from a little area over on Highway 90 called Hand, H-A-N-D. In 1870, he and his brother William Todd somehow or another found the money. I don't know how they did it, because there was no money after the War of Northern Aggression in the South. We bartered everything. It was either trade or bartered, because there were no greenbacks. We didn't have any money. There was no Marshall Plan established to help the South. Heck no. You think the North was going to help the South? Not during Reconstruction, they were not. No, sir. They're going to do everything they could to carpetbag. Carpetbag. You've heard that word before? Anyhow, somehow or another, my great-great uncle, William Todd, got 700 acres of land where Witherswash is. And he sold 350 acres of that to my great-great-grandfather, Erasmus Todd. And the two of them developed the southern, or on the south end of what's now Myrtle Beach, down to the beachfront. And my mother talked about picking cotton down on the beach fields before my grandfather decided he didn't want to farm anymore. How he got here is my grandfather, Dan Nance, grew up in North Carolina at Charlotte. And he came to Myrtle Beach in 1909 and met my grandmother. He was 18 years old at the time. Met my grandmother, who was 15 years old. And the two of them got married in January of 1910. He was in 19 and she was 16. And back then, you had dowries. My great-grandmother, Marissa Edge, my grandmother, Mary Todd, her father, Lowell Todd, or Erasmus Todd, part of the tradition was that the daughters or the family members had a dowry. Daughters had a dowry. So he had 350 acres of land. He had 5 children, so he divided his property up and he gave 75 acres to my grandmother. And that area was along what's now 13th Avenue South and went all the way down to the beachfront. And he farmed that area during the flu Spanish-American flu. And then the boll weevil came along. You ever heard of boll weevils? Okay, well, they destroyed the cotton crop. By then, he had already picked up the trade of contracting, my grandfather Dan Nance. So he traded most of the property that he owned down on the south end of what's now Myrtle Beach, and he kept a small tract there along 13th Avenue South, but primarily he traded the rest of it to Myrtle Beach Farms, and he bought from them what's now downtown Myrtle Beach. It's called the main block of downtown Myrtle Beach, and he built a house at the corner of Oak Street and 8th Avenue. And he moved his family there in 1922 to the corner of 8th Avenue and Oak Street. And he started into the contracting business, and he started building storefronts along what's now Main Street. And some of the buildings he built are still there. And but the house was moved. In 1928, we had 1926 actually, it began. The Woodside brothers out of Greenville, South Carolina, were enticed to come to Myrtle Beach, and they really made am I running too long? I'm sorry, it's 3 o'clock. I'm not halfway through. You want to bring me back? Anyway, we'll talk about the Woodside. The Woodsides built the Ocean Forest Hotel, but that's not the only thing they did. There was other things they did for Myrtle Beach that just kind of get swept under the rug sometimes, but of course, what I was talking about, Highway 15, that was the way into Myrtle Beach. You came up from Socastee, and that was the road end. Of course, they had the railroad track, but the road end was up through Socastee. Well, they took it upon themselves to improve the downtown area, build a sales office, which became the Lafayette Manor on 9th Avenue, but they also improved Highway 17. They're the ones that initially paved Highway 17. They paved it up to the area of the Ocean Forest Hotel. And what did they pave it with? Concrete. Why did they pave it with concrete? Because you didn't have any asphalt. But the waterway, which was dug in, I'll get to that in a minute. Let me say that the reason why they did it in concrete, it was a good road surface, and my friend Robert Shelley here lives on Calhoun Road, which is a concrete drive from 1928, and is just as much good a road surface today as it was in 1928. Anyway, the Woodsides put in an electric plant, brought electricity into Myrtle Beach. They also brought sewer. There was a sewer plant out on 10th Avenue. You go out 10th Avenue across from Sam's, there's a solar light field. That light field was where the sewer plant was. There was a concrete sewer treatment plant there. Even before the waterway was dug, there was a concrete sewer plant there. And the Woodsides brothers were integral in putting that sewer plant in. Well, that allowed, when you did that, I call it the big move. Downtown Myrtle Beach, they moved everything around. They took the seaside in, they jacked it up, turned it 90 degrees, and moved it down 9th Avenue, and installed sewer in the building and added another floor. So it made it a 4-story building rather than 3. And they built the Lafayette Manor on 9th Avenue, and along 17. As I said, they ran 17 onto Highway 15, 501, which was Highway 501 at the time. What else do I need to talk about, honey child?
I'm telling you, for a man who was nervous about doing this,
I just rattle on.
and the fact,
I can rattle on, can't I?
the most amazing thing is that you know these years. I mean, I couldn't tell you what I did 5 years ago, and you can just rattle off the years, Bob. You are, your mind is amazing.
I don't know about that, but I wanted to talk about the schools. That's one thing I wanted. My grandmother, Mary Nance, went to off of Highway 15. There's a road called Pine Island Road. And it didn't go to Conway, but it went to that area I spoke about called Pine Island. And that was that was where the people lived, was out along Highway 15, along Highway Pine Island Road. And my grandmother went to school at a schoolhouse about a half a mile west of Highway 15, along Pine Island Road. And then in 1911, my mother was born in 1916 right off of 13th Avenue South, where Bridging Road and 13th Avenue South, where Sterling Village is today, that was where the farmhouse was. And that's where my mother was born in 1916. And then when she got ready to go to school, they built a schoolhouse for her. I was kidding, but they built a new school. And the school was along Highway 15 at what's now 3rd Avenue North. You go to 3rd Avenue North, there's a vacant field there. That's where the school was, a two-room wooden school at the corner of 3rd Avenue North and Highway 15 in 1911. And then the area kept growing. And in 1928, they built a brick school where the present post office is. And it was a school that was had all the grades in it. Had it went through the 11th grade. You didn't go 12 grades back then. You went 12. You went 11. And my mother graduated from there in 1933. In the second graduating class from that school in 1933. And she was the first female to go off to college. She went off to the closest college. Guess where the closest college was? Hartsville, South Carolina. Coker College in Hartsville, South Carolina was the closest college to Myrtle Beach. And that's 70 miles from here. You had some in Charleston, of course, colleges in Columbia, but none closer than Hartsville. So my mother graduated from Coker College in 1938. But anyway, we're talking about Myrtle Beach schools. The 1928 school was abandoned, 1916 school, 21. The 1921 school was abandoned, and they built a brick schoolhouse on where the post office is today in 1928. That building burned the year I was born, 1946. It burned. And for a year, classes were held at various places around Myrtle Beach. They had them at the First Baptist Church, had them at the Seaside Inn, and other places that could accommodate classes. I saw where Billy Roberts, a friend of mine, actually graduated. His graduation ceremony was held at the old NCO club, which was just south of Withers Swash, where the current Holiday Inn is. I think it's Holiday Inn. They changed names several times, but anyway, they did it around and about. They rebuilt the schools. They built two schools. Built a grade school that I went to school in at back where the post office is. And then he went up across the street here and built a high school that Carolyn and I went to right across the street. That's where I graduated high school. I went to the grade school. It was a block away. I lived on 4th Avenue, and the grade school was on 5th. So I just walked to school. And then when I hit the 6th grade, moved up here to the junior high, which was part of the high school, and then graduated from here in 1964. Since then, They've, of course, built a brand new high school, or a new high school, and multiple schools. Most of them are in that educational block centered around the newer high school. I should stop. It's after 3 o'clock.
Well, I'm sure people have questions, but Billy Roberts told me that you guys used to swim naked in Witherswash.
Well, yeah. Wasn't anybody around.
But I heard Carolyn was there. I just heard this. So I'm piecing all this together, wondering, Carolyn, do you remember it that way? No, she doesn't remember it that way. So it wasn't memorable, guys. That's all I can tell you. Billy Roberts said that most fun was swimming naked.
Reuben might have been there.
Reuben?
Reuben might have been there.
Naked, huh? That's what I heard. Both ways. But when Carolyn showed up, they put their bathing suits on. Let's make that perfectly clear for the video. Yes. So who has a question for Bob? Fascinating years, and the whole theme should have been water.
I can go on for a couple of hours.
There's no doubt in my mind.
Oh, I brought something I wanted to talk about. I have a show and tell.
Okay, I thought that was in case you had to go to the bathroom.
No, this is our goal. This is something that was unique to this area that made Myrtle Beach. I bet you can't even tell me what it is.
No, but I want y'all to see if this doesn't look like, a pea bucket, or as they used to say, pecan.
You can come up and here.
It was pecan originally. Okay, go ahead.
Gold. We all are acquainted with the fact we got plenty of sand. Well, sand, you can't ride around on sand very well. You get stuck. But they found something native to the area here that helped us build Myrtle Beach and North Myrtle Beach and the surrounds. It's called coquina.
Gumbo.
Coquina. Well, it goes over gumbo. But you had to have something to stabilize the ground. We didn't have any clay like you have upstate, so what do you stabilize the ground with? But especially when they dug the Intracoastal Waterway, they ran into veins of this. This is called coquina. And you can dig it with a shovel. You can spread it out. You can run it over with a tractor and kind of get it level. And then once you start running over it, it starts hardening. And it gets hard. It gets just as hard as concrete. After you run it and pack it a little bit, after a couple of years of packing it down, you'd be hard placed to put a shovel in it. It just packs down. So that's what we built the roads out of. It's coquina. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have any roads around here. We'd have nothing but sand. Right, Mr. Ed? We had coquina. That's what we built our roads and parking lots out of. The only problem with coquina, they won't let us build roads and parking lots out of it any longer. You can put it down and use it as a base for the asphalt. And it's great base. That's what you want. It's coquina. But after it initially gets laid down, it will dust. You see that that movie, Where Art Thou, Brother?
Oh, yeah.
And you see that Rob going down that dirt road, and the dust just billowing out behind him. That's a coquina road. I mean, when you ride down a dry coquina road, you can't even see behind you. It'll dust so bad. So they don't let us use it for roads any longer. But you can use it for parking lots if you pave over it. But that's coquina.
Any questions, my friends? What? Oh, yes.
So I have a question. So when did your family move up to the house up there on
Matheson Lane?
Yeah, on the corner of Matheson. And was that swash still viable at that time?
It was a swamp. My father bought 2 lots. The house he built on Hampton Circle sits on 2 lots. And in 1957, I was the monkey for 2 strong men, and we went up there in the summertime. We had a Jeep, an old open World War II Jeep, and crosscut saws and axes and bush axes, and we cut the trees off those 2 lots. It was a swamp. And then after we cut the trees out of it, Daddy put an A-frame truck up on the road and stumped it. And then he put in, I think, 60-some pilings. That house sits on pilings. If it didn't sit on pilings, it would sink into that swamp. Mr. Sloan lives right behind that area up on what's called Matheson Lane. It was nothing but woods back when I was growing up. I used to go back there and play in the woods where his house is. But anyway, we moved up there answering your question, we moved up there in 1958. And yes, Deephead Swash was still open to the ocean, and Ocean Boulevard was 2-lane. And I remember when they wanted the 4-lane Ocean Boulevard, they went in there where Deephead Swash crosses, and then took a drag line in there and mucked out the marsh with a drag line, and then filled it back in with sand, and put the 4-lane Ocean Boulevard that you got today in there beside the Beach Colony Resort. But that lake there, that was a part of Deephead Swash. You ever suffer any consequences from being on that old swash?
No, we're fairly high up there. But the swell comes right there by your
house,
dad's
yeah.
house, diagonally down there, so that we're higher than that swell. We're on the high side of it.
It's so interesting to hear the way things were, right? Gosh, any other questions? Let's hear for Bob. Oh, yeah, there was one question. Sorry.
In addition to the German prisoners of war, someone had mentioned there was also some Japanese prisoners there at the Center City.
If there were, I never knew about it. The original German prisoner of war camp was up on Cane Patch Swash, just on the other side of Cane Patch Swash. And it was just a temporary structure. It had wooden walls and canvas top. But then they must have, I don't know what they did down here, they moved them down to the bombing and gunnery range. But there were 600 prisoners. And that was about 1/5 of the population of Myrtle Beach. We didn't talk much about the population, but literally those 600 prisoners, about the size of the population of Myrtle Beach at the time, permanent population.
Yes.
Bob, I'd like for you to come back again, and let's move it from the 50s to now.
Mm-hmm.
You can't remember that good.
Thank you,
Maybe
Thank you,
so.
Robert.
And also a little more acknowledgement about the Woodside Brothers and how much they contributed to this growth of this city.
Well, Jennifer's right over here. So Jennifer, bring Bob Gray Part 2.
If I could remember what I talked about this time.
We'll remind
But,
you. We will remind.
Well, let's just start off when you were a paper boy. How's that?
When I was a paper boy, okay.
Now, one more thing I heard, and I hate that Phil Render is no longer here, but Phil Render, when I ran into him at the grocery store recently, he said, "Oh, I'm excited about Bob Gray talking." He said, "But when I hear the term Bob Gray, all I think about is his magnificent singing voice." Did y'all know that Bob was a singer? I mean, you hear how good he announces. He should have been in television, but you would have never made any money. So you did the right thing. But I will say that Phil says you can sing. You want to just end the program with a few bars from your favorite song?
Well, thank you.
Come
Thank
on,
you. Thank you
come
very
on.
much. But the COVID did me in when I got COVID initially. It just killed my singing voice. But thank you for remembering that. And, I don't know, Carolyn, what you want to hear. Carolyn, remember when we used to sing together back in high school? She was.
Come on. People just want to hear a few bars.
Dixie.
Oh, I wish I were in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland.
What a diaphragm. I'm telling you, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. And I don't want anyone to think he was calling me a carpetbagger when he looked over there. I told him when I first heard that word when I was in high school, I didn't even know what that was. So he was educating me earlier. I want to thank all of you so much for coming. And Jen, do you know when the next program's going to be?
We're actually going to skip the holidays, and it's going to be in January.
All right, Robert Edge, wave your hand. There you go. Our coroner is going to be talking about his life in North Myrtle Beach and some of the growth there. We're going to have a wonderful time. So look forward to that. Robert and I were talking about it earlier. He's quite excited. He says he's nervous, but if you're as nervous as Bob Gray, it's going to be awesome.
He'll fall right in.
What was that? Okay, he's going to take Ativan before he comes. God bless us all.
Robert can fill me in because he and I are distant cousins.
Well, there you go. It's going to be
See, my-
awesome, I know. And Bob, we're so grateful. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, everyone. And yeah, I guess have a wonderful holiday season.